Hello, my name is Nicholas Morgan, and I'm an editor at Ahval News, and this is Turkey Abroad. Joining me today is Cevdet Acu. He is a researcher at the University of Exeter, and he is doing his PhD on refugees in Turkey. Cevdet, welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
The first question I want to ask you relates to the whole COVID-19 pandemic and the impact it's having in Turkey. We have over 2 million cases there now, over 20,000 deaths. And this isn't even going into a lot of the economic damage that's going to be addressed like later on across the next few years. But what I want to ask you is, how has the pandemic really affected the millions of refugees living in Turkey right now? What are the challenges they're facing in particular through this?
Thank you so much for the question. It is quite important, actually challenging for many countries, for many people across the world, as we all are aware. And it is, of course, affecting refugees as well. And there is like kind of a misperception that, they explain we are all in this together. Basically, they mean like the virus, the coronavirus is affecting like all people. I think this is kind of wrong because if someone is saying this, they that mean that they are, ignoring that the inequality among the society, among the people, there are rich and poor people. So based on this reality, we can see that particularly poor people, vulnerable people in the society, they have been affected more than the others. And like refugees are like across the world, they are one of the more vulnerable groups of people, and so they have been affected badly. And like one of the things they lost during this pandemic is the welfare, I can say. And most of them, they work in low skill jobs. This is like kind of common problem, I mean common issue across the world. And Syrian refugees also in Turkey, mostly they work in low skill jobs, and the jobs that they cannot implement at home. So there is a thing that during this pandemic, some works they start to work at home. They I mean, if it is possible. But for Syrian refugee case, that's not easy. I mean, as I said, they mostly work in manual work and in low skilled sectors, and there is no way for Syrian refugees to continue to work. And that's why there are many studies, many research have been done by different organizations, like the one is it's called the Economic Policy Research Foundation of Turkey, and they did a research to conduct how the pandemic is affecting the vulnerable people, particularly refugees. And their research shows that 88% of refugees actually they lost their job during this pandemic. And the other organization, as far as I know, they also had a research about the influence of COVID-19 on refugees. The organization called the Association for Solidarity with Asylum Seekers and Migrants in Turkey, they also have this similar result. And it shows that like around 60% of Syrian refugees, they were unemployed before the pandemic, but after the coronavirus crisis, that ratio increased 88%. So you can see that there are different organizations, they did the research about the impact of coronavirus crisis on refugees, and it is similar. So it is quite problematic to say we are all in this together about the impact of COVID. And you may know there is a quite famous French economist, Thomas Piketty.
Yes.
He published a book, the book called Capital in the 21st Century, and he focused on the inequality between rich and poor people, and he tried to explain how that gap between rich and poor people actually increased historically. So this is like kind of reality, and during this pandemic, we are witnessing a lot. We can see that clearly. Like people who live in poor situation, you know, they became more and more vulnerable. And refugees, of course, they are like one of the most vulnerable groups among the people.
So also attached to this is just the domestic attitudes that exist in Turkey towards a lot of these Syrian refugees, and there has been a certain amount of hostility over the years that predates the pandemic, of course. And you wrote an article recently in Ahval, actually, about the rise in hate crimes against Syrians through COVID-19. Um, how has the pandemic contributed to this rise in any way, or what should we understand about this?
Um, Thank you again. This very important question about the hate crime. And, you know, before I respond your question, I need to explain, you know, one important thing. Syrians, they are not refugees legally in Turkey. They are under temporary protection. And like Turkey signed the 1951 Geneva Convention. This is the agreement which explains the, you know, fundamental rights of refugees and the asylum seekers. And Turkey signed that agreement, but there is restriction, geographic restriction. Basically, Turkey said that I only accept the people from Europe, like for the asylum, and they only can get the refugee status. So Syrian, they are not refugee legally. In the beginning, actually, you know, many people, particularly politicians, they were calling them guests. So this was a political choice. You know, they did that on purpose because in our culture and in many regions in Middle Eastern countries, guests, they don't have any right to criticize. They have to accept whatever has been offered to them. So this was, you know, very important. So I don't think, you know, that was the coincidence. They labeled them as a guest. So right now, like as I explained, they are under temporary protection. They are not refugee, and so but practically they are refugees. That's the main reason I am keep saying Syrian refugees, just for the legal term. I want to highlight that, and the hate crime is increasing recently a lot. As you explained, I published, you know, 2 articles about the hate crime issue in Turkey against Syrian refugees, and I can, like, you know, based on official data, only, you know, 6 Syrian refugees were killed, you know, between July to, you know, September 2020. 6 Syrian refugees, and the problem is, you know, that half of them they were under 18, so they were children. But the other problem that the people who killed Syrian refugees, you know, they were also, you know, quite young. So the problem here, we can see that, you know, the hate, you know, among the young generation against Syrian children, this is quite an important issue. And that was the main reasons I felt, you know, responsibility, not as a researcher, as a human being, to highlight that issue, because this will make more problem in the future in Turkey. This hostility is still going on, and I particularly, you know, focus on one case which was published in Ahval, Hamza Ajan case. So Hamza Ajan was one of the Syrian refugees in Turkey. He was 18 years old, and he was killed by 4 people, you know, by beating. It is horrible. And the only thing Hamza was trying to do during that, you know, horrible incident, he was standing with a woman. A woman was harassing by these 4 people. The only thing he was trying to say, this is not acceptable. You cannot do this. You cannot abuse any woman. But, you know, instead of listening what Hamza was saying, these people, they just attacked him. And unfortunately, we lost him. He was only 18 years old, 18, only 17, sorry, 17 years old. Uh, he was just trying to survive. But as I said, people in Turkey, in my opinion, they don't listen to each other. This is the main problem. That's why there are many misperceptions, against Syrian refugees. Like I can mention some of them. Like many people assume that Syrians, they get money from the Turkish government directly, and also many people, they assume that Syrians, they don't pay any tax, or Syrian students, they can easily get the scholarship from anywhere for their education. And again, most people assume that people, Syrian people, they got the Turkish citizenship, and they assume particular, like many of them, they said after 5 years, many Syrians, they will get the Turkish citizenship. If this is true, like because most Syrian refugees, they live in Turkey like since 2011. So if this is true, right now, more than 2 million Syrians, they will get the Turkish citizenship. Is this the case? No. We know the official data, and it is not true. But again, as I said, they are influenced. In my opinion, there are two main actors. They are spreading these misperceptions against Syrian refugees. One of them is media, and the other one is politician, and they portray refugees in negative way, like a lot. I can give more details, but before that, actually, I would like to explain the issues against hate crime against Syrian refugees. It is related to one of the British economists theory. It's called Malthusian trap. So Malthus was a British economist in 18th century, and he had a theory, and he was assuming that population growth is ahead of the agricultural growth, and he was assuming after a certain time the food supply will not be enough for the population growth. And during that time, there was around 1 billion people across the world, but right now it is around 8 billion. He was basically wrong because he didn't calculate the efficiency and productivity. Industrial revolution was one of them. And people in Turkey also, they have this assumption, and they assume there is already limitation about the job market. There is limitation about the food supply, but they don't pay attention about the productivity. Many Syrian refugees, they are quite talented people. I did, a few field work in Turkey. I particularly taught many Syrian refugees who created business in Turkey. And I focus on Gaziantep case. It is one of the cities in the southeast of Turkey. And according to the official data, more than 2,000 Syrian companies have been created after 2011 by the Syrians. And there are some research explain that more than 10,000 Syrian companies have been created after 2011. So basically, there are people who try to create who try to add economically in the society. But as I said, there are misperceptions a lot against Syrian refugees, and they don't, try to communicate with the Syrian refugees, but they have the perception. So I don't know if I respond your question.
Well, you mentioned in your answer some of the actors involved that are contributing to this hostility are in the media, the mass media, and the politicians. And of course, we know now that many of the largest media enterprises in Turkey are owned by businessmen with close ties to the government. So do you think that with this sort of atmosphere of hostility coming from both these areas, would that mean that would you say that it's fair to say that this climate of hostility is being encouraged by the Turkish state in any way?
I can say that the media and the politicians particularly, they have quite big impact on the people perception. And that's like one of the two main factors in my opinion, like as a researcher. Because when I check the the Turkish newspapers, I can see that most media, not all of them, of course, there are good journalists, like really they are objective again towards the Syrian refugee case, and they try to do their best. But most media, they portray refugees in negative way, and you may see that there are like some TV programs in Turkey. They discuss the economic issues, political issues, social issues in Turkey. After a certain time, that TV programs, suddenly they discuss the Syrian refugee issue, which has nothing to do with the the agenda of the discussion. So I saw like just a few days ago, like a TV program, they were discussing the COVID-19 and the vaccine issue, but suddenly like some people they start to talk about the Syrian refugees. It has nothing to do with the topic. And I know some people they assume that even the climate change because of the Syrian refugees. It is horrible because the again the influence of media and the politicians, like they assume the economic problems, all the social problems is because of the Syrian refugees. That's why they blame them, like they are vulnerable groups in Turkey. So they don't have the the enough platforms to to respond to these accusations, I can say. So it is also easy for many people in Turkey and to just complain, they are the reason, because these people they don't do enough research, and they can just see the Syrian refugees. By the way, there are like around 4 million refugees actually in Turkey. 3.6 million are Syrians, so they are more visible, in the society. That's why they are particularly attacking the Syrian refugees. I know many people like they don't have enough courage, I can say, to criticize the Turkish government, but instead what they do, they blame the vulnerable groups. Like one of them is Syrians, and whatever happens, if it is bad, it is about the Syrian refugees. And even in the media, when you see the news, if if there is a crime, that crime is related to a Syrian refugee, Syrian refugee, committed a crime, immediately you will see that the Syrian refugee nationality, next to crime. But if it is something good, again related to Syrian refugee, you will never ever see that nationality. When it comes to bad thing, they mention about okay Syrian refugees, but when it comes to the good thing, they never ever mention. In my opinion, the right thing, they will never ever mention the nationality, because if it is a crime, it's a crime. Why do you need to highlight the nationality, or the gender, or the ethnic identity, or the religious identity? If it is a crime, it's a crime. That's it. You shouldn't think, or you shouldn't try to increase the hate among these people, because when you particularly mention about the nationality, if it is something bad, this increases the hostility, the hate among this society. I think the politicians also, like in Turkey, they use that, but as I said, this only increase the hate among these groups.
What about how the pandemic, or this atmosphere is making it more hampering basically the work of many civil society groups that might be trying to work with Syrians? I mean, not long ago there was a debate in the Turkish parliament about reforming the structure of NGOs, adding public trustees to the boards of them, and then giving the courts increased power to shut down the ones that they found in violation of certain codes. But do you think that between this clampdown on civil society and, of course, the pandemic, it's making it more difficult for even NGOs and other groups to try to help Syrians in particular?
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, I can say that. I mean, during this kind of crisis, particularly, if you, instead of, reducing the hate among this society, if you put, some legal regulations which may increase, the problems to, help the refugees, like the one that you mentioned in Parlamento. I know many, organizations, they declared that already this is not good for the, organizations in Turkey. They will not have their freedom. I totally agree with that. And during this kind of health crisis, like, the tension increased a lot, because there is again like a kind of paradox actually. Many people, they blame refugees, because they assume that refugees, they are taking jobs from the local.
Mm-hmm.
So this is one of, the groups. The other group, they blame refugees again that, they don't work and they just take the money from the Turkish government. So there is like kind of paradox here, and if they work, they were blamed. If they don't work, again, it's a problem. So I am asking, like, whether they should work or no, like how you can explain this, paradox. Uh, so during this kind of crisis, it is particularly, important, I guess, instead of, increasing the, the hate among these groups. I think the role of government should be how we can reduce, this hate and how we can live together, because this crisis is still going on since 2011. So I think we as soon as possible, we need to, try to figure out how we can live together in peaceful way instead of fighting. I always say there is a, space for everyone, to live in peace.
So, as you said, this crisis is this crisis has been going on since at least like 2011 with the start of the Syrian war, and then of course we have COVID-19 going on. But even as the pandemic comes to an end, we're going to have the leftover effects of it, like the structural changes to the economy, like with small businesses, tourism sector, of course. And it just brings the question in my mind just how much more difficult it can get maybe for the government to, if it wanted to, assist refugees given this whole atmosphere of intolerance and hostility. Do you think that even with the pandemic coming to an end, this hostility will abate, or do you think that it's going to increase? Where do you stand on it?
Yeah, that's really a good question. As long as they, start to implement, the social inclusion programs to reduce the hate, even if the pandemic is over, this, problem will go on, because the problems didn't start with the pandemic in Turkey. The problem about the hate against refugees didn't start with the coronavirus crisis. There was already, a problem among the, two groups, yeah, between local and Syrian refugees. But this coronavirus increased that. So if the government, doesn't start to, implement the, the programs and the policies which may, reduce the hate against refugees, this crisis will go on. Of course, this is not the only, related to Turkish government. This is the place that we need to collective responsibility, like, because the countries who signed the 1951 Geneva Convention, particularly European countries, they have also responsibility, and but it is quite, controversial issue again, like in terms of the presence of Syrian refugees, and I can say also the role of European countries was quite problematic in this crisis, because we need to talk about the responsibility of these countries as well. And when the crisis started, they basically ignored, and they didn't mention about the problem. You may know that, the European countries, particularly, they start to talk about the refugee crisis in 2015, but the issue was already there. It didn't start in 2015. But the problem here, when Syrian refugees like try to across the, the borders to reach Europe, and the European countries start to label them as a crisis. But as I said, there was already a problem there, and they didn't assist enough. I could say even right now, they basically try to force Turkey, keep the refugees in your area. We will provide just the financial support. This is not
It's not
good.
sustainable.
Yeah, I mean this is not trade. You cannot do trade on people's life. You cannot approach the refugee issue as in numbers or as in just financial issue, because these are people like us. I mean, we are not different from each other. Each one has a name, has a story, has a memory, and these people, they didn't escape. They didn't leave their country just for fun, or they're not tourists, because still there are many people in Turkey, they assume that Syrian refugees, they are here just for fun. And many people also in Europe, I know they still don't know what the refugee is. So collective responsibility, as I said, like for the long-term solution, because in refugee case, there is, short-term solution and long-term solution. Short-term, of course, the particularly, non-government organizations need to approach the issue to support, financially and socially, and try to implement the social inclusion programs, in the receiving countries. But also on the long term, the all countries, particularly those who signed the Geneva Convention, they have the responsibility, to find like a way actually that can help Syrian refugees.
We're now moving into that stage also where, to address COVID-19, Turkey's going to start vaccinating their citizens. If I remember correctly, they already began yesterday, and they even had, of course, the video of President Erdogan receiving his vaccine to encourage Turks to trust it and take it and everything. So, given that skepticism in the Turkish general population, and along with the skepticism, just access to it in the first place, do you think that there's a risk that refugees may be excluded or from the vaccination program, or that they're not going to get access to vaccines soon enough in Turkey?
Yeah, honestly, I don't want to think about that. I don't want to even think that they may exclude the refugees. From my understanding, there are certain criteria like who will get the vaccine, and like basically the people who work in the health sectors, they have the priority. I totally agree, and then they have the certain age groups. They don't mention about the nationality there, and I hope they don't exclude the Syrian refugees, but we will see. For now, it is really early to say something, and a certain thing. I don't see any, tendency that they exclude the Syrian refugees, but we will see.
And what about access? One more question that I'd just like to ask is, how has access been for many of these Syrians to healthcare during COVID-19? Has there been
Yeah,
difficulties?
this is one of the challenging again during the pandemic, because in Turkey there is a like a the regulation that each refugee is registered with the immigration authority in Turkey based on the city. So if the refugee is in another city, by the way, you have to get the permit to travel another city in Turkey. If you want to travel among the cities, let's say in Turkey, for Syrian refugees, they need to get permission. And if the Syrian refugee during this pandemic in a city that he or she is not registered, they cannot get the health access. So this was like one of the main challenging for them, and because many of them, they are out of their the registration city, let's say. This is like something that I still don't see any like a, the it is kind of problem because they should have their freedom already in the beginning. Like why they have to live in particular city. This system doesn't work. And most people, most Syrians, they are, in different cities. They are not in the cities they have been registered. It makes sense because, different issues are there already. Some of them, they move different cities because of, the job.
Yeah.
Uh, so it totally makes sense to me. This is like, again, one of the issues that, in the legal regulation, they have to think about it again.
Cevdet, it was great to have you on to talk about this topic with Turkey abroad. So I really do hope that you can come back again soon. And of course, best of luck with your research and your PhD.
Thank you so much for inviting me again. It was great to talk to you about this issue.
My name is Nicholas Morgan, and this is Turkey Abroad.